Shalom Aleichem. We return to our shiurim in Mishneh Torah Rambam, Rabbeinu Agadol, Rabbeinu Moshe, Rabbeinu Maimun, Zichrono Livrocha. And we are in Hilchot Talmud Torah, Perek Aleph. And I will share the screen with you. This is Halacha Yod Gimel or Yod Aleph, depending on your edition. Very well. The Rambam says over here, "U'hayav l'shalesh eth zaman l'midoto." We're speaking about the mitzvah and the chovah, the requirement, the obligation to study Torah daily. Previous to this statement, as you can see here, Rambam said, "Av emotai hayav adam limud Torah." Av yom moto, a person is required to study Torah all of his life. And we discussed last time how if one does not study Torah, if one is not constantly reviewing, one will forget. This is the nature of the human being. It is only by constantly studying that one does not forget. And we discussed in the last year why this is. And we also began to discuss this statement here that we see now. U'hayav halacha Yod Gimel or Yod Aleph, u'hayav l'shalesh et zman l'midato. A person must divide his time studying Torah into three sections. Shalish v'Torah shebichtav, Shalish v'Torah shebe'al peh, u'shalish yovin u'yaskil aharith davar mireshito. 1/3 Tanakh, that is Torah Nevi'im u'Chutuvim, all of the 24 books of the Tanakh, that is Torah shebichtav. Shalish Torah shebe'al peh, a second section, refers to all aspects of the Torah shebe'al peh, the oral tradition, which is required, which is necessary in order to understand and implement the Torah in the real world. As we discussed last time, it is like the software to the hardware of the Torah. The Torah shebe'al peh is the software, the Torah shebichtav is the hardware. And the interface between these two things, understanding how to use this software and how to approach various topics and problems, new issues which appear. That is the third section. Ushalish yavin uyaskil aharith davar mireshito, uyasi davar midavar, uyadama davar ledavar. In other words, in-depth study, comparative study of one case to another case, understanding the principles, the underlying principles that underpin all of the Torah, all of the Torah. And knowing how to extrapolate from the Pesukim, from the Torah shebichtav, until that point, the point is reached where the person understands what is the correct understanding of this pasuk and what can be learned from this pasuk. And the same is true with regards to a Mishnah. How to understand the Mishnah, the statement of the Mishnah, or for that matter, a Baraitha. A Baraitha simply means a Mishnah Hisonith, a Mishnah that was not included in the Mishnah, a Halacha that was not included in the Mishnah. What can you understand? What should you understand from it in the first place? And what other things can be beyond the explicit statement of the Mishnah or the Baraita, or for that matter, statements of the Amoraim in the Talmud. Memirov, statements of Amoraim, and later, of course, this applies to the people, Chachamim, who came after the Amoraim, the Savoraim, the Geonim, the Rishonim, and the Aharonim, down to the present day. What can be understood from what we see before us? Does this apply in this particular case, or only in that particular case? Rambam continues, Waheach yotzi ha'asur v'hamutar v'chayotze bahen midvarim shelamad mipi ha'shemu'ah. Shemu'ah means literally that which is heard. In other words, the tradition, that which is passed down, the tradition, which one hears formulated in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And occasionally we also get glimpses of certain traditions in the Torah Shebichtav. How all of this is to be put together and utilized and implemented in order to know what is asur, what is mutar, what is tahor, what is tameh, etc. And this is what we refer to by the term Talmud. In-depth analysis and investigation. So Rambam told us that we need to study these three areas of the Torah. This is based on a statement in the Talmud Bavli. I'm sharing with you now the source, which is in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. I take it that you can see the screen. You can see the statement in front of us. Amar Rav Safra Mishum Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya. My dichtiv v'shinan tam levanecha. It states in the Talmud, what does that mean? V'shinan tam, that you shall teach them regularly and inculcate these things in your children, in your sons, so that they will know them. They will be on the tips of their tongues. Al tikre v'shinan tam ela v'shilash tam. Do not read v'shinan tam ela v'shilash tam. So this is a drasha, the intention of which is to tell us that there are different parts and areas in the Torah, and they all have to be studied. So the essential statement is what we see here now. Le'olam yesharesh adam shenotho. A person must divide literally his years, his life. Shalish b'mikra, shalish b'mishnah, shalish b'talmud. Now, if you take that statement literally, shenotho, one's years, one's life, that means that you would have to assume that you know how long you are going to live, if you were to take it literally, and divide your time on earth into three sections. So let's say you assume that you're going to live 90 years, for example, then you would have to study 30 years Mikra, 30 years Mishnah, 30 years Talmud. And therefore the Talmud asks, who knows how long one is going to live? No, the correct interpretation, this has to be understood as meaning leyomeh, not your years in the sense that you divide up your entire lifetime, but rather every day. That is how it should be understood. Now, if we continue, here we see, I bring the Pirush of Rashi here. Rashi over there in Kiddushin explains Leyomeh Yemei Shavua. Rashi did not explain what we just read in the Rambam. Rashi explains the days of the week are to be divided into three sections. And Rashi, this statement appears also in Avodah Zarah, Masechet Avodah Zarah, Daf Yud Beth, Amud Beth, and there Rashi explains more explicitly. Rashi says, Shnei Yamim Mikra, U'Shnei Yamim Mishnah, V'chen Kol Shavua U'Shavua. 2 days of the week Mikra, 2 days of the week Mishnah. Mishnah means knowing the basic halacha the basic statement in its raw and not fully explicated form. So this includes studying Mishneh and studying Baraitot, where you have a statement and you hear the statement without really investigating, without fully understanding it, perhaps. And the Talmud, as we said, is the fuller, more complete, comprehensive investigation and understanding. So Rashi speaks about dividing the week into 3 sections. You may ask, what does one do on the 7th day? Rashi doesn't say explicitly, but apparently, and this is how Rabbeinu Yonathan Milunel explains, that on Shabbat, and he writes this here, I quote this here, B'Shabbat yishne kol ma she'lamad b'chol yimei hashavah. On Shabbat, he should review everything he studied during the week, which, by the way, was the Seder HaLimud, was the way things were done in Yeshivat Volozhin, once upon a time at least. They would study a daf per day. Each Talmud basically would study it to the best of his ability, that daf. The Netziv Volozhin, the Rosh Yeshiva, or one of the Rosh Yeshiva, because at some point, Rabbi Chaim Brisk also became the Rosh Yeshiva, a co-Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin. But the Seder Limud, the order of study that I'm describing, I believe was instituted well before Rabbi Chaim Brisk became Rosh Yeshiva, in the days of the Netziv, and very possibly before that. The Seder of Limud was studying a daf per day, and on Shabbat they would review all of the 6 dafim they had studied that week. That's according to Rashi, but this is not the ancient interpretation, which is what we saw in Rambam. How do we know this is the ancient interpretation? We have we have 2 sources in the Midrash which state explicitly that which we saw in Rambam, and it was not Rambam's interpretation. This is the ancient interpretation, which is in this case not like Rashi. The Midrash states, B'Yalkut Shimoni on Sefer Tehillim, Remez Tau Resh Yod Zayin. It says, Asher Piryo Yiten Be'ito. This is on the first parak of Sefer Tehillim. Rabbi Hanina Amar, Zeh Talmudo Shel Adam, Shehu Yoreh V'Oseh Hayom Itin. This is the statement of the Midrash. A Chacham, a Talmid Chachamim who studies and toils at the Torah, he divides his day into sections. Eth LaMikra, Eth LaMishnah, Eth LaTalmud. Here it doesn't say Shalish, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Here it says, or 3 sections. It says 3 times, 3 periods. And this is relevant, as we shall explain in one moment. So here you have explicitly the Perush that we saw in the Rambam, and the same similar statement appears in Midrash Tehillim, Midrash Shoher Tov. This is also on the first parak of Tehillim. On the same pasuk, Asher Piryo Yiten Be'ito in its right time. In other words, there is has to be a certain schedule and structure to one's study of Torah. It cannot be haphazard. Should not be haphazard. It should not be without thought, without some kind of a plan how one forges ahead in the study of Torah on a daily basis. Asher Piryo Yiten Be'ito Elu Talmido Shel Adam Shehem Yir'im BaTorah V'Osim Et Hayom Itim. Again, the similar statement. The day is divided. Et LaMikra, Et LaMishnah, Et LaTalmud. Okay, that is the correct Girusa of the Midrash. there is a certain shibush, a certain confusion of the girasa of that midrash as it appears in most sources. This is the correct version of the midrash. And we see that the Geonim explained this in the same fashion. And there is a very interesting statement which I want to read together with you from one of the early Geonim, Rav Natronai Gaon. We have the statement here, and we have a teshuvah from Rav Natronai Gaon, in which it says as follows: Shesha'altem v'kara ze al ze v'amar. This pasuk in Yeshayahu. What he said in Ruach. In other words, we're talking here about what is called Seder Hayom, Sidrat Yoma. This is these are the Pesukim and the Kedusha that is recited in a minyan, in a Beth Knesset, at the end of the Tefillah. This was actually the end of the Tefillah. All the other Tosafot that people are used to hearing or saying nowadays, after the Seder Hayom, after what we call today Uvad Tzion, because these are Pesukim that are said before the Kedusha, Uvad Tzion, Goel, etc. That was the end of the Tefillah, as we see in Rambam in Hilchot Tefillah Perek Bet, for example. Olenu Shabeach, Shir Shel Yom, Pitum HaKetoret, all these things are not a Chovah, they're all Reshut, they're all optional. And there are all later additions. They became commonplace and standard later. The question here that's being asked of Rav Natronai Gaon is, Ma ta'am yesham likrot v'letargem? Why do we read these pesukim at the end, and why do we not just read them, we also say the targum? As we know, we say the pesukim, and we recite also the targum Yonathan on those pesukim. Why is this done? It's not as if we didn't have Kedusha earlier in the Tefillah. We have Kedusha. If there's a minyan, you have Kedusha in Yoser, Birkat Yoser HaMe'oroth, before Kriyat Shema, and then you have again Kedusha in Hazarat Hashas, the Tefillah HaSibur, reciting the repetition of the Amidah. So why do we have it a third time? Hishiv, Kach minhag rishonim. This was the ancient practice, says Rav Natronai Gaon. Makom sheyesh sham talmidei chachamim, in a place, in the Beth Knesset, the Beth Midrash, where people have now finished praying together. And we're not talking about the common people, perhaps, who don't learn very much or don't have time. We're talking about people who will remain in the Beth Knesset after the essential tefillah is over. At this point, having said the tefillah, that is to say, the tefillah hasibur, hazat hashas, and nefilat hapayim, and the seder kedusha, the seder hayom that we just described, is recited. That's and the end of this you say kaddish, and that's the end of the tefillah. So the end of tefillah was kaddish, after Uvad Tzion, after Seder Hayom. Mevi'im Navi, the practice is in a place where you have Talmidei Chachamim. A Sefer Navi usually would refer in these times to a Mechila, like a Mechilat Esther, written on Kalaf, without Nikud, without Ta'amim. And when they would read from the Pesukim, one of the Nevi'im Navi, were Korim Bo Ka'asara Pesukim. Hen Haser, Hen Yater. They would read some of the Navi, approximately 10 Pesukim. And they would read the Targum, or recite the Targum, perhaps Baal Peh even. There were those who knew the Targum Baal Peh, Targum Yonathan. This was considered an essential part of reading a Pasuk. You couldn't read a Pasuk without looking at the Targum. That simply wasn't done. And having done so, they would then read these Pesukim. Having done so, they would then read these Pesukim of Seder Hayom that we described, Uvad Tzion Goel. כשם שתרגמו אותה פרשה של נביא, and they would read the Targum. ואומרים ותישאני רוח, ומתרגמים אותו, כדי לסיים בשבחו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. In other words, what Rav Natronai Gaon is describing here is the seder of tefillah, and then immediately limud, as things were done in ancient times. One assumes this was the practice both in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel. Rav Natronai Gaon, of course, was from Bavel, from Yeshivat Surah, and Rav Natronai Gaon is from the 8th century, Leminyanam. And the order was that at the end of the tefillah, the sibur, they would, having completed the Filat HaPayim and having said Kaddish, before they got to Seder Hayom. Seder Hayom was the final act, or the final set piece that was recited as a tzibur after this limud. At the end of the Filat HaPayim, they would say Kaddish, Amen Yeheshmer Rabba, as we saw, because there's always Kaddish after Tefillah, after Shmon Esrei. Then they would read some section from the Tanakh, from the Navi, and probably it wasn't just a Navi, it was often also from the Ketuvim, it could be. They probably had an order, a daily seder, whereby they learned the Fia Seder by order, according to their whatever they were able to cover every day. They would have a cycle whereby they would cover the entire Tanakh over a number of years. This is probably connected to the concept of the Sedarim, the Seder or the Sidra of the Tanakh. The Tanakh was divided into sections, not Parakim, not the chapters with which we are familiar, which were actually invented by the Christians, but Sedarim, which are longer than the Parakim generally. And these were essentially these were daily divisions of the Tanakh, so that over a number of years one would cover the entire Tanakh. So they would finish the Tefillah, that is to say, Shmon Esrei, Chazrat HaShatz, Nefilat HaPayim, and Kaddish. Then they would study a part of the Tanakh. From what we see here, not necessarily a large section. It says here 10 Pesukim. If it was a Seder, as I'm describing, and perhaps there was a difference between Bavel and Eretz Yisrael when it came to how much was studied per day, they would study some section from the Tanakh, they would read the Targum, and then they would say Seder Hayom, and then they would recite these Pesukim of Karazar Zawiyam, Kadosh, 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 and Vatisani Ruach, Baruch Kvad Hashem Melchomo, with the Targum, and end with Kaddish Darabanan, end with Kaddish after having studied Torah B'Rabim, and 10 people studied Torah together, and that would be the end of the public organized tefillah with some limud Torah. And then after this, he describes, Rav Natronai Gaon continues, Wa'harkach Mikadashim and Wa'asakim Torah. They say Kaddish, and then they would study Torah. Now each person would study according to his want, according to his level. Harosed ba Mishnah Osek. He who wishes to study Mishnah does so. Harosed ba Talmud Osek. And if you want to study Talmud, that's what you would do, either by yourself or with a Havrutha, with a friend, with a colleague. And this is all in order to fulfill that which the Chachamim stated. A person must divide his time, his study, into 3 sections. Shalish ba-mikra, shalish ba-mishnah, shalish ba-talmud. Very interesting statement now follows. He says, now, because things are no longer what they used to be, he's writing this in the 8th century. He says, seeing that today it is more difficult to make a living, and the Talmidim, the students of Torah, have less time to spend on the study of Torah, and they have to spend more time making a living. כיוון שרבתה עניות ודלות, והוצרכו התלמידים למעשה ידיהם, ולא היו יכולים לעסוק בתורה תמיד, ולהשליש בכל יום. And seeing that not all of these students, the Talmidei Chachamim, didn't always have the ability to find the time in each day to study a section of the Torah, the shlish and the shlish and the shlish, nismechu ala Talmud bilevad va'azavu mikra mishnah. It became not unusual for many of the Talmidim, of the students, to spend their time almost exclusively on Talmud and spend less and less time on Mikra and on Mishnah. This is a drasha on the pasuk. All the streams flow, all the rivers flow eventually to the sea. Mikra, Mishnah, Midrash, Akaru, Likrot, Banavi, B'chol Yom Ahara Tefillah. So because of a lack of time and economic, financial pressures, this traditional order of things, of studying part of the Tanakh after the Tefillah together with the Targum, and then ending that limud with Seder Hayom, and that's why it's called Seder Hayom, the order of the day, the fixed order and set piece of the day in the morning. This was eventually fell into disuse, fell into this order of things was not upheld as it was in earlier times. So he says, so even though this practice ceased to exist, but the siyometh, the ending of this limud of Tanakh, which was done immediately after the Tefillah, which was then ended with Seder Hayom, with Uvalef Zion, this remained. Lo akroatham, this was not removed. And that's why we have it to this day. Mipnei ma lo akarum, she kadosh kiddush meshulashu, kadosh kadosh kadosh. There's a special value to the kiddusha, and therefore this was retained. And this statement and this explanation and tradition as to how things used to be and how things should be appears in a number of Rishonim. And for example, another Gaon writes, "O Haidana, today mishum tirada lo masinu b'chulho." We do not have the time, and we don't have the ability, the wherewithal to live up to this statement of dividing our study into 3 sections, and we focus almost exclusively on the Talmud. Because in the Talmud involves, if you study Talmud, you're also studying a Mishnah, you're also studying a Baraita, which the Talmud quotes. The Talmud also quotes Pesukim. And so we make do with that. What do we see, therefore, from all of this? We see that the phenomenon that with which we are familiar today in most yeshivot, that the study of the yeshiva, the organized study of the yeshiva focuses exclusively on Talmud, is nothing new. That does not mean that it is good, that this is how it should be, but it is not new. These statements go back 1,200 plus years. And the other thing that we understand from this, and it was not for any ideological reason, nor for any kind of understanding or claim that it is better to study Torah in this fashion. Quite the opposite. It was seen and understood to be a very unfortunate reality situation, that the correct study of Torah began to unravel, and that the division of time and focus on the various parts of the Torah was no longer the order of the day. But this was not l'chat kula, this was b'di'avad, for economic, financial, and other such extraneous reasons. But the concept, the idea that Chazal was speaking of was to divide one's study on a daily basis. This is what we see clearly from this Teshuvah of Rav Natronai Gaon. And this is also quoted later, and a similar statement appears in Seder of Amram Gaon, who was shortly after Rav Natronai Gaon. And he explains this is why we have in the Siddur, we read from the Torah, the Korbanot, we read Parashat Tzavat B'nei Yisrael V'amata Lehem et Korbanei Lahmi Le'ishai, which is from the Torah, and we study the Mishnah, we recite the Mishnah, the Perek Hamishi of Masechet Zevachim, Perek Ezehu Mekoman, and the Midrash of Rabbi Yishmael about the Shlosh Esrei Midot, which is, because it's a Midrash Halacha, it is like Talmud. This is done in order, says Rav Natronai, because of this statement of Le'olam Yesheresh Adam Shenoto, Shlish B'Mikra, Shlish B'Mishnah, Shlish B'Talmud. In other words, the original concept of reciting these various things before the Tefillah, before Pesukei de Zimra, before Kriyat Shema, that you begin the day by reciting Birkot Torah, and then reading sections from the Torah, and then from the Mishnah, and from the Talmud, or something which is on the same level of Talmud, namely the Midrash Halacha of Rabbi Yishmael. This is all in order that every Jew should recite at least one small section of the various parts of the Torah daily. Of course, later, as we know, these various parts of the Tefillah, after Birkot HaShahar, then you have Birkot Torah, and then these various parts from the Torah which are recited before Pesukei de Zimra, and then Pesukei de Zimra, followed by Birkot Kriyat Shema, followed by Kriyat Shema itself, Tefillah. In the world of the Mekubalim, much later, many centuries after this time, and this is mainly Hidush of the Ari, which we find in various parts of the writings of the Ari, or Rabbi Haim Vital in the Shmona She'arim. The various sections of the Tefillah and the Siddur were connected to various Kabbalistic concepts. But as with almost all of these kinds of Kabbalistic explanations, these come many centuries, sometimes millennia after the fact. These are not the reasons for these practices. These are explanations that were given much later in order to try and explain the necessity and the purpose and the meaning of what we do. But the real reason for reciting the Parashat HaTamid, and then Mishnah Ezehu Mekoman, and Midrash of Rabbi Yishmael about the Shlosh Esrei Midot, the reason for doing this is what we find here in this statement of Rav Amram Gaon and other Gaonim. And this is what we find in another Teshuvah from the early period of the Rishonim. This is the statement here. We don't know the name of the Gaon or the Chacham. V'sha'alta lama anu doroshim b'mishnat Rabbi Yishmael b'chol yom. Why do we recite this Midrash Rabbi Yishmael about the Shlosh Esrei Midot? V'ta'amo shel davar lefi she'anu tzarichim lomar b'chol yom v'yom mikol min u'min misidrei Torah. We are required to recite and study the various parts of the Torah daily. And again, he quotes the statement from Masechet Kiddushin about L'olam Yisheresh Adam Shenoto. And therefore, this is what we do. So from all of this, we see that the original intention of the Hachamim in this statement was to study Torah on a daily basis, to study the various parts of the Torah on a daily basis. And this is the explanation. This was the way this statement of Chazal was understood, as quoted here from the Shiburei Aleket, for example. He quotes this Perush Rabbeinu, in the name of Rabbeinu Hananel and Rabbeinu Tam, Leyomeh, the meaning of the word Leyomeh, that should be divided into Leyomeh, Shalish Hayom, a third of the day, B'Mikra, etc. shlish b'Mishnah, shlish b'Talmud. So we see that this is not just Rambam's interpretation. This is the ancient explanation and understanding of all the early sources. Rabbi Natan Gaon, Rabbi Amram Gaon, Rabbeinu Hananel, Rabbeinu Tam, and many others. And this is also the Perush and the understanding of the Tosafot in a number of places in the Talmud. And the Rosh, the Or Zarua, the Rashbam, they all follow, and from what we just learned now, the Rambam is of the same view. There is, however, one other thing that needs to be understood with regards to this, and that is based with regards to the following statement of Rambam, which we will now look at. Rambam states here, having laid down the rule that we are to study all parts of the Torah daily, Rambam says, Kesad, halacha yudalad or yodbet. Kesad, how is this to work? Haya ba'al umanuth. If a person is some kind of an artisan, and he works at his job every day, how does he divide his day? How does he spend his time? Yeh osek b'melacha shalosh sha'oth bayom. He should work 3 hours of the day, uva Torah tesha, and spend 9 hours of the day studying Torah. It seems that it was possible once upon a time to make ends meet and to conduct one's affairs in this fashion. And this should cause us, give us pause to consider how very different things are today. The world has completely, the world is out of control. Civilization today is out of control, so that everything is about work, and money, and there is no time for those things that are truly important. The Rambam says you have time to work every day. He thinks 3 hours should be sufficient, and you have 9 hours to study Torah. What do you do with these 9 hours? Othan hatesha koreh b'shalosh mehen. You read Torah shebichtav for 3 hours. Uv'shalosh b'Torah sheba'al peh, and 3 hours you study Torah sheba'al peh, which means Mishnah. Today it also means studying Mishneh Torah, which is like the Mishnah, which is a brief formulation of the Torah sheba'al peh without much explanation. So you study Torah shebichtav 3 hours, Torah sheba'al peh 3 hours. Uv'shalosh mitbonen b'da'ato lahavin davar midavar. That is Talmud. So Rambam's understanding is that the division into three should be into 3 equal parts, 3 equal thirds. With divrei Kabbalah bichlal Torah shebichtav. In other words, all parts of the Torah, of the Tanakh that is, are considered Torah shebichtav for the purpose of this discussion. Uferushan, and all the various perushim to help you understand the Torah shebichtav, hem bichlal Torah sheba'al peh. They are considered part of the Torah sheba'al peh. So, in order that you know how to divide your time and on how you should calculate how much time you spend on this or that, the Rambam tells you all study of Tanakh is considered Torah shebichtav. All explanation of Tanakh is considered Torah sheba'al peh. And when it comes to pardes, which means what we would call today philosophy or Jewish thought, all you could also perhaps include in this Midrashe Agada in general. So this would include also studying Rambam's Mishneh Torah or Rabbi Yehuda Levi's Kuzari, or for that matter, it could include studying, Machon Shilo by the Rebbe Mizbritz, a famous Hasidic sefer. All these kinds of areas of Torah are called Pardes, and then Bichlal HaTalmud, and they are considered part of the third section of the Talmud, which is the investigation, the thinking, the more involved and detailed understanding of things. However, it should be noted that not everybody agrees with this statement, with this division of these three sections. So the three sections are to be equal. The Ran, for example, on the Rif, says explicitly that not so. He says, "Walau dauka sheyishalesh yomotha b'shaweh shariat Talmud tzarich zman harbe." We all know, says the Ran. Rabbeinu Nissim states, we all know that studying Talmud and halacha be'iyun requires a lot of time, more time that is required to read and memorize Mishnayot, and more time than is required to, shall we say, understand a certain parasha in Sefer Divrei Hayamim. And therefore, to suggest that these three sections must be equal, this is not true, he says. And the Mishnah, the Torah She'Ba'al Peh, is also more time-consuming and more involved than the Torah She'Bichtav, which, by the way, you could argue that this is not necessarily exactly so. It depends on what level in what fashion one studies the Torah She'Bichtav. If one studies Torah She'Bichtav in a manner whereby one understands each word, each shoresh, and in all its various nuances and complexities, and one looks at all the various sources and mefarshim, well, it becomes very, very involved, and one understands the dikduk, the grammar, and the way this word appears in various places, and different shades of meaning that need to be understood when this shoresh, when this root, this word or variation on that root is used. That is also a very complex and involved aspect of Torah. But generally, it's true that Torah She'Ba'al Peh, because it deals with details and implementation of the Torah in the real world, requires more time. So the Ran says these three parts need to be kept, yes, but they don't have to be equal in time, and they shouldn't be equal. You have to set aside an appropriate amount of time for each of these three parts of the Torah. So says the Ran, and the Ritba makes the same statement. The Ritba states in his Chidushim on Avodah Zarah, he writes, he brings both Perushim of Rashi and the other Rishonim about the Shalish, whether it refers to the days of the week or the hours of each day. He says, however, according to all these Perushim, enam halakim shawim, we're not talking about three equal thirds. Each of these sections must be given, each of these mikzaot, of these various aspects of the Torah, must be given their proper time. Each according to what is required. So it can vary also from person to person. And the Gra, in his Be'ur on the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Resh Mem Wal, Seif Daled, where this is brought, this halacha about studying Torah in all areas of the Torah and dividing one's time into three, and the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Shita of the Rambam, that is, these are to be three equal parts. The Gra apparently leans towards the interpretation of the Ritba and the Ran, because he quotes the Ran in his Biur HaGra, and it seems very clear that this is his opinion. All right, so we return to Rambam. Rambam adds a very important statement with regards to this requirement of studying all areas of the Torah. And Rambam said you have to devote equal amounts of time daily to these three parts of the Torah. Rambam says this is true, but only when a person is younger and when a person is becoming familiar with the various parts of the Torah. Rambam says, when is this the case? When a person is beginning to study Torah, when he's not fully familiar with all parts of the Tanakh, with all of the Mishneh, etc., he has to spend more time becoming familiar with these parts of the Torah and reviewing and constantly doing Hazara and Shinun so that one does not forget. Aval, says Rambam. However, as a person studies and learns and knows more, a person will reach a point where he has gone through the Tanakh many times and he knows the Tanakh, and now he has to make sure he doesn't forget the Tanakh, that which he has learned. And the same is true of the Mishnah. He knows the Mishnah. He has studied all of the Mishnah. But he also has to review it. But this reviewing does not have to take up the same amount of time as the original learning, the original study did. And therefore, as a person grows in knowledge and wisdom and understanding and becomes older, a person should set aside time for the study of the Tanakh with divrei hashimu'ah, and literally the words of the tradition, that is to say, the Mishnah, the Torah She'Ba'al Peh. Why? So that a person will not forget any part of the Torah. And then he will be able to spend most of his time studied in the section or the part of the Torah called Talmud. In other words, in-depth study of various parts of the Torah, whatever it is that he wishes to study and understand and delve into more, according to his ability and his inclination, according to his level of understanding and his ability to find the time and to focus on these various involved studies. So Rambam agrees essentially with the Ran and the Ritba that these three sections are not required to be equal thirds for all time. At the beginning they should be, says Rambam, but later, as a person becomes more familiar and has covered much of the Torah and all of the Tanakh, all of the Mishnah, and it's a question of retaining that which he has learned, he will be able to spend less time on the retaining, on the Shinun, on the Hazara, and more time on the Talmud, on the in-depth understanding of whatever it may be, whether it's Halakha, Agadah, other spiritual pursuits related to the Torah. We shall stop here for today. Hayu beruchim. Hizku v'yaras levavchem kol hameyahalim l'Adonai. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.